talked about our lesson last week, some of the things that came up that I think really kind of helped to get it started in my mind was we're here, where did we come from? And we really got to look at that, I think. And so I go outside and look at the stars at night and I say, wow, this is incredible. Where'd they come from? And so we begin, one of the thought processes are, well, they just come out of nothing. Had a little small dot about the size of a pencil lead that exploded and everything else come from that. But reality, that really doesn't seem to give any answers to what I'm looking for, because I don't believe that really is the reality of what we see. So, I understand that something does never come from nothing. And so with that in mind, we're here and something does not come from nothing. There must be a cause for that. And so we looked at that last time, and so we looked at one of the major views was that the universe was a naturalistic process. It's sometimes called evolution, and that was that the big explosion, and there was a primordial soup, and from that began to come some molecules that had life, and so that life began to finally turn into fish and amphibians and birds and animals and monkeys, and then here we are, and that really doesn't make any sense to me. And there's reasons for that, and so, but that's one of the thought processes that come about. And so people, I guess we all got the same information, and we try to look at it and say, well, what are we learning from what we're able to see? And so that becomes pretty important, I think. And so that's one process, and in that process, it talks like dinosaurs lived 250 million years ago, thereabouts. And then man come along about 3 million years ago, and that's a problem to me. We'll talk about that later on, but you see, that's kind of what this evolutionist process seems to lead to, and that's kind of what they look at. And you've probably seen pictures that shows the tree of life and the tree growing, and there's out of this branch comes dogs and cats and people and monkeys, and that's probably something you saw at school, I suppose. But you'd see it in school today probably if you went to school. So that's kind of that. But we look at the cause, at least I certainly do, and I believe the evidence firmly supports it. I look at it and say this creation has got to have a cause. There must have been a cause that brought it into existence. It can't come from nothing. And so therefore, if it's got to have a cause, then we looked at it last time and we said, well, it looks like that there's a supreme being or a supreme cause that caused this to come into effect. And so it's either it came in from from nothing, or there's a power behind it that brought it into existence. So we'll look more at that today. But so this is kind of where we come from in terms of how the two major thoughts, I think, process of how I look at where we come from. So in this lesson today, I want to look at some of the things that talk about the existence of God. I'm not proving who God is, but I want to try to get to look at the evidence and say, okay, this evidence we look at today will lead me to believe that there is a God, a creator, that brought this into existence. And so when I know that's the case, then that really helps me a lot to try to understand what this is all about. So the forces of atheism and humanism and evolution have been extremely successful in convincing many people that either God is dead or he never existed in the first place. And that's, the last couple generations of our kids going to school, they try to learn, this evolution process has really been put upon them. We live under a constitution that said everybody has a right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And so if you want to be gay, you can be gay. If you want to abort your children, you can abort your children, or your fetuses that are children. And so they look at it that way, and then they look at it and say, well, I have a right to choose whatever I want to believe, and so I want to choose sometimes for my convenience. And I'm not going to look at the evidence too much. And sometimes we go through life and never really look at the evidence. We try to be scholars. We look at the scriptures and try to see what the scriptures teach us. But to look at the evidence that supports that Bible, that's really powerful in my mind. And so some people would say, well, God is dead, or he's never here in the first place. And so that begins to become the philosophy of some people. So today some people would say, today we don't know for sure if God is real or he could not prove that he exists. I read in a book where a guy went to school to teach about the facts of science that supports the theory of that there's a theistic evolution, not theistic evolution, but there's a God. And anyhow, so one of the kids that got up to lead the prayer said, you know, Father, we don't know if you really exist, but if you're there, we want to do what you want us to do. Now, see, that's really a poor conception. That's just almost, you're looking on faith and you're not really sure that there's even a God out there. And you say, but I'm going to believe it. But I think there's a lot more evidence about that. So while it's true that God is spirit, John 4:24 says God is spirit, and those that worship must worship him in spirit and truth. So that defines God. He's not got a body like you and me, but he's a spirit. And so that helps me to understand that. So some people would say, well, you cannot approve the existence of God. If you can't use the five senses, then we have to look at other intellectual means such as logic and reasoning to prove that he does exist. We can't go out and say, I can touch, I can feel, I can smell, I can hear, I can taste. I know God exists because he's spirit. We just don't have that opportunity. Now, we did have opportunity to see his son, or there was a generation of people that did, God in the flesh. But the God that we read about in the creation process, for example, is spirit. And so we can't actually go say, I've touched him, I know about him, but we can say that there's a logical evidence that really supports that. So let's look at some of the evidence this morning is what I'd like to try to do. Okay, there's a number of ways we can try to prove the existence of God, or as we've called him earlier, the supreme being or the supreme power. And so we'll look at that. And so one of the things that we need to look at is every creation must have a creator. That is a fundamental premise. Every creation must have a creator. The universe exists. Well, where did the universe originate from? Where did it come from? Well, we look at here, which says, and I believe this is probably true, we've got three choices. So we stand back and look at the evidence and says, okay, we're here. We know that, I really know I'm me, and you know you're you, and we know we're here. Where did it come from? And so the idea of a creation must have a creator. Let's look at that and see what it says. And so one of the options is that this earth has all been here eternally. It never had a beginning, never will have an end. That's what they look at it, I guess. Or another option, it was created from nothing, which is another option. It just come into being. It just boomed into being. Or another option was it was created. So let's look at those just a little bit and see what we can gather from that kind of information. The universe, if we start looking at the first one, is the universe eternal? And so from the scientific information that's pretty readily available, it says that this universe that we're a part of today is expanding. So I look at time moving forward, I'd say, well, it's getting farther and farther away, the components that make it up. But if I look at where I am today and say, well, let's look backward, what do you see? Well, we start looking backward and backward and backward, and some people say, well, that points to the big boom. Of course, some people would say, certainly I would say that God did it this way. That's the way he created it, but he didn't do it in an evolutionary process. So science denies the eternal existence of the universe either in the past or the future. So there's no scientific knowledge that would say we've been here forever. This universe has always been here. But that would be one of the options I think we could look at. Well, then another option says something exists. Well, whoops. So something now exists, and this indicates that something has existed forever. It's only possible that the universe was created. That something must therefore have been responsible for creating the universe. So it seems to me that it is rather illogical to try to say that something comes from nothing. You and I would know better than that, so it's illogical for us to look at that process, I think. So the self-evident truth that something, it's a truth, it cannot come from nothing. You know, I would say if you think you believe in something can come from nothing, I got some nothing I'd like to sell you. You see, and so it's logically it does not make any sense. So it cannot come from nothing. So if we look at the next one, since something now exists, so what I'm saying, we said it cannot, It's not been always existing. It cannot come from nothing. So the logical conclusion I'm left with is that there's only one possibility, and that was it was created. So if I look at it and say, so since something now exists, this indicates that something has existed forever. Uh-oh, I just said you can't have something forever. But the only possibility that the universe was created, this something therefore must be responsible for the creation of the universe. So what I'm talking about, we said there's got to be a creator to have a creation. So what has existed always or forever, or as we would define it, the creator. The creator was there. Now, when did time begin? When I've read something, it says time didn't even begin until God created time with the universe. I wasn't there, so I'm not really sure I know the right answer to that, but I think that's a logical answer to me. So when I look at eternity, how far back does eternity go, or how far forward does it go? Well, the only thing I know about is time that we're a part of in this created universe, and so I would say that God created time when he put the universe together, when he created the universe. So we now are governed by time, but before the creation process, I don't know if there's any accountability of time. We just talk about eternity backward, and so I don't know that there was a 24-hour clock that measured eternity day back, day back, day back. I don't believe that's probably true. So if I say, well, there's a God that existed, a creator, if you would. He created the universe. He put time, space, matter, all that stuff together that we're a part of, and he created time to go with it. That's the way I would look at it. So since something now exists, this indicates that something has existed forever, and the only possibility it was created, and that something therefore must be responsible for creating the universe. Okay, what would I conclude? I conclude that something was God that we read about in the scriptures. So that's the only evidence that I see that really brings me a logical conclusion to be drawing from what I'd be able to understand. Every creation requires a creator. That is a fundamental premise that you cannot overlook. So if creation requires a creator, well, who is that creator? Well, I would say it's God. So another point that I think comes in mind when I get to looking at things outside, I go out and look, and I look at night. You go out and look at night and look at the stars, and you say, wow, that's incredible. You know, what I've read is the universe is made up of some billions of galaxies. And in each galaxy, there are billions of stars. And in our Milky Way galaxy that we're part of, there's billions of stars. And I wonder, why in the world are these things all out there? And honestly, the only evidence I've been able to come to, I says, God had a purpose for the creation, and that is you and me and this creation that we're a part of on this planet Earth. And of course, this is an opportunity. I guess I'd wonder at times, well, why did God even create us? And, to me, the thought that comes to my mind is, well, how do I look at God? One of the characteristics is God is love. What if you're a person of love and you have nobody to love? You go get you a puppy, I guess. I don't have any desire to go get a puppy. But I look at people that have lost their mate, and it's a very difficult time. Unless you've been through that, you don't have a perception of what it's like. So we're made, I believe, and love is such a key characteristic of us, we're made like God in some respects. I look at God as love. So why would he create us? I believe he wanted something to love him back. So that's kind of my reason for saying, why are we here to start with? Why fool with us? So I say, well, I believe God had certainly a motivation and purpose to do it, and try to understand the purpose for that. Why are there billions of galaxies out there and billions of stars in each galaxy, and we're one planet here right in the middle of a galaxy, and our sun is one of the billions of stars in that galaxy, and we happen to be, how in the world is that possible without a purpose? You see? So I look at it and I say, boy, I know there's a purpose. I think God has a plan when he put this universe into place. Why are there billions and billions of stars and galaxies out there and we're just one little place here? Well, the only thing I know is the best knowledge I have, we're the only one. And I guess there could be life out on other planets and different universes, and I have no idea about that. But I do know that God created us. So when I try to look at why in the world did he do that, I just cannot get past the idea that God had a purpose for us. You and me, as we're sitting here today, we have a purpose. Mankind, Adam and Eve had a purpose. Cain and Abel had a purpose. It wasn't a purpose for Cain to kill his brother, but they had a purpose, and generations come down to generations, and we all have a purpose. God has a plan for us. Otherwise, there would have been absolutely no reason for the creation to me. I don't think there'd be any reason for all the universe, all the galaxies and the stars, billions of stars. I don't see any reason for that if we're not trying to have a purpose with God and he's got it for us. So my conclusion is that creation has got to have a creator. And I look at why did he create it, and I said, well, there must be some reason for that. And I conclude that his reason is that he wanted us to be people who would return the love that he's got for us. And how do you love? Well, you love and try to do things that honor the person you love. That's the way I'd see that. God created us. He loved us. He's blessed us enormously. We are so blessed. We could not possibly have evolved from monkeys. I just don't believe it's possible. You look at your brain and how the brain works, it's not possible. So there's got to be a creator. So that's one of the points I think it's really helpful as I try to look at this. Another point is that every design must have a designer. And what I say about that is the design we see today is one more proof that God exists. And so we'll just look at some things here to consider just about us in this planet Earth. Consider the design of the Earth. It's in the right type of galaxy. It's in the right location within the galaxy. The odds of being near the right star, it's highly unlikely unless we've been put here. The being at the right distance from our sun is considered. I think it's 92 million miles away from the sun. Having the right rotation, the tilt angle is important. The moon helps to bring that about. Possession of enough water on this planet that we can use and make use of. Having the right atmospheric conditions to sustain our lives, the right mixture of nitrogen and carbon and oxygen in our lives to breathe so we can make use of ourselves. That could get out of whack a little bit. You don't last long if it does. You put your car in the garage, you're trying to work on it, and you start it up and the garage door is shut, you just might not last too long. There are certain mixes that you cannot tolerate. But the things that have been placed here for us, and when we look at all that, it's just incredible that this earth has been designed. And the design, I look at it and I say it's proof they're a designer. And so if I look at the next chart that I have, maybe. Well, let's see here. I think I probably didn't change the page when I should have. Yes. Let me go forward a little bit. The earth. You know, the earth, we got the sun. We got the earth that rotates around the sun. You know that, and it takes, I think, 365 and a fourth days for a complete circle around the sun. Of course, the sun is in the Milky Way galaxy, and it is actually rotating and moving too. But if you look at that orbit, it's not a straight line. We don't just pass by once in a while. It's like a circular path. And so what I'm trying to say, the information that I've got says that if that orbit, that path is to deviate from a straight line by a 1/9 of an inch every 18 miles. It's a real slight curve. I mean, it's really slight. But if it departed more than 1/8 of an inch, we'd be so close to the sun, we'd be incinerated. We'd be coming closer to the sun as time went by, and we'd cooked and burned up. We could not exist. Or if we departed to 1/10 of an inch per 18 miles, we'd be getting farther away from the sun, and what would be the result of that? We'd freeze to death. So it's extremely powerful, I think, to look at the earth as designed. And so we know that everything that's designed requires a designer. And it looks to me like we're perfectly designed to be where we are to do what he's wanted us to do in this place that he's made for us. So I'm not willing to give that up myself. You know, you got a car you drive, and so you get out there and you turn the key on, and what do you expect? You expect it to start. How come you expect it to start? Because the people that designed the car will make it when it works, function properly, that thing will start and ready to go. It had a designer, didn't it? That's pretty obvious to me. How about my watch? $25 Timex from Walmart. But you know, that puppy keeps really good time. It's not very impressive. My son's got a Rolex watch, and he rolls it out there once in a while for me to look at, and I say, well, my $25 and your $2,000 keep about the same time, my son. But anyhow, even this cheapie got a designer. It's got a design. So I would never, ever say that things come without design. And your TV set, when you turn on your TV set, do you think there's design behind that instrument? Well, sure there is. You know there's design there. So we look at the things around us and you say, everything we see and know has design in it. And so therefore, that's evidence, I think, that lets us believe that we're talking about this supreme power, this creator. And we're looking at that and saying that's God, but this is design requires a designer, creation requires a creator. Then there's another one that I would like to look at a little bit this morning. Codes require one to program the code. That's kind of easy one to think about, I think. But it says in our DNA code, you know, everybody talks about DNA, and I don't even know what DNA stands for. I've read it 15 times and never have tried to remember it because I don't really use it much. But I know DNA is an acronym that we use a lot. If you go to the doctor, well, they might want to check your DNA for various things. But if you look at how that came about, this says the DNA code, which is required by more than 13 years and hundreds of labs and millions of research dollars to unravel that. And I've often wondered when I look at that, I said, well, that's incredible they figured that out. I mean, that's really impressive to me. You go out and kill somebody and you leave a little blood drop on the sidewalk there, and the police can come by and take your DNA and that, and they know who it belongs to. It's incredible. So the DNA is really important, but what it does, it proves to me that there's a code that goes in this DNA, and that code had a designer. That code had a programmer of the code, for example. Now, when I was in the military, I was Marine Corps, so I went through all the training processes for that. But then I got to go to school for, I think, 8 or 10 months. And what I learned to do there was to repair radios or repair electronic stuff, really. But then my assignment was, I was given an assignment to go and be a radio repairman for a Marine Corps branch. I forget what they call it. They didn't call it a branch then. Battalion, I guess it was. So that was my assignment. That's what I did. But when I did that, they had circuit cards, and everything was a component on that circuit card. You had resistors and capacitors and inductors and vacuum tubes. Everything that functioned had a component on the board to make it function. And so the designer would say, okay, I'll put that all together, and this one links to that part, and this part links to that part, and so it functions. So that was the way I learned it. If I were to look at a radio, one of the ones radios we had was a PRC-6, I believe. It was a portable radio communication to 6. It's about like a big shoebox that you put up here at your ear and you could talk. But it worked, and that was the technology when I was in. Today, the technology is so advanced, everything's conceived with a chip or a computer chip. That computer can do whatever functions that need to be generated to do the same thing that all these components used to do. So technology has really come along in a huge way. But every chip, every computer chip that makes anything function has got to have a programmer. And you know that as well as I do. So what I'm trying to say is, in our cell system, in our body, the cell system is so complex. How did the cells know to become a liver cell or a blood cell or a nerve cell? How do the nerve cells communicate back and forth with one another, electrical pulses between cells, and gets in the brain and tells your brain what's going on? How in the world is that possible without a designer, a creator? Programmer. Oh, yes, we're programmed. There's no doubt about that in my mind. Another one that we looked at just a little bit last time was the law of cause and effect, and we said that for every material effect, there must be an adequate cause. A cause that brings about an effect. So what that says, if I say, okay, I see an effect, I see here, I see a saw. So I say that saw, look at that. Well, there must have been a cause that brought that saw into impact where it can really work. I drive a car. There's a cause that brought that car into existence. Some company manufactured it. So when I look at that, I say every effect that we see has a cause that produced it. So when I start looking at we talked about this a little bit last time. Remember I said that every material effect in the universe is created. Material, and I kind of tried to draw my arms out here and say, here's a big universe, all the stars and galaxies and people and everything on the earth, and we're all inside that. We're material creation. And then I said, well, where is God in all this? Back when it started. I said, well, he was outside that. God was outside of this creation. And so he created it, and then as time goes along, we read about God being active in our lives. Through the Holy Spirit, for most of us today. The Holy Spirit's been given to us. God is active in our lives, but at the time of the creation, he was not in this creation. He was outside it. He was a spirit. He created it. So if I can try to say, well, what caused the universe? I say, well, God created it, but we would say that the Supreme Being was the cause. Well, then somebody might say, well, what was the cause? What caused the cause? You know, that's a logical question, I think. What caused God? Scientific law requires that every material or physical effect, there must be an adequate cause. So everything that we see and we're a part of, there must be a cause for it. But God is spirit, and therefore he was not bound by this law. This is a law that's repeated frequently in science. Oops. This is dangerous up here. Okay, while individuals may not want to accept that there is a God, I think the evidence points to the contrary to that. The question is not what do you and I prefer or desire, rather it's what we can know. And what you can know is what you realistically and honestly look at the evidence. That's the way I would see that to be the case. The evidence above that we've already talked about, the different things that we talked about, the evidence above proves that there is an eternal God who created the earth and mankind. There's no other explanation. We said we didn't come from nothing. We said we hadn't always been here because we know that's not true. So there was a creator. So we believe that the information clearly points to the fact that there is a creator, and the creator that we've seen is God. Now next week we're going to be talking more about how do we define that creator. Today we're talking about what evidence seems to say that yes, we're created. So that's part of this. So the honest heart seeking the truth recognizes that there is far too much evidence for God's existence to ignore. But you know, how many people just ignore it? How many people, say, oh, yeah, I kind of believe the Bible, but, I'm going to do my own thing my own way, and I don't really care. We know people like that a lot. You see, and so I honestly believe that people take that attitude in life, have never looked, have never tried to check and see what does the Bible teach and what evidence is there that supports the idea that the Bible is supported by much evidence that clearly says that's where we need to go. So if you're not interested in doing that, well, don't worry about it, I guess. But I think it's important to look. So here's a scientific interpretation that we might look at. We're here, so the cause for humanity must be greater to us, but it's similar to us. You ever think that we're created in the image of God? We must have a lot alike. Of course, we're not God, but we have a lot of characteristics, I think, that are like that, like God. Since the time of dawn, it has been observed that people only come from people. There is no evidence, no fossil record, no evidence that we came from animals. That people want to try to do that. I've read in books there's been at least half a dozen. Scientists want to be able to say, boy, look what I've done. I've discovered something that nobody else has ever figured out. And so they put together some bone pieces and they say, look at there, that clearly demonstrates that man came from animals, monkeys. But there's none of that. They're all false that's been predicted and provided for us so far. There's a whole chapter in the book that I've got at home that tells about all those that are false. And it was intentionally false for the scientists to want to get recognition. They said, look what I've done, look at me. That's not a very good strategy in life, I don't think. So there's no evidence for that. So if I look at the effects point to a cause and say rationally, we can conclude that all things begin with a single uncaused first cause. Everything, we conclude that all things began with a single uncaused first cause. God was not caused. God was there. God was spirit. How in the world he got there, I have no idea. But I do try to look at the evidence and say the evidence points clearly that that's the only possibility that has reality to me. So the God who is above all and exists before all other causes. From some of the laws of science that we can work with to help us understand this, if you've studied physics or classes like that, you'll realize that one of the things that they teach, and it's really true, no new mass or matter or stuff or energy, that is matter if you would, is generated anywhere in the universe, but every bit of the original mass and energy is still there. So I take and put a gallon of gas in my car and I drive it and I get the power, I get change that liquid gas to power to drive my car. And the other part of that product is exhaust heat that goes out into the exhaust, into the universe, into the air, and it's heated into the universe. It's heat. So it's not really lost, it's just converted, it's just changed. So that's a fundamental parameter that you can learn in science, and that seems to be very true. It's repeated over and over and over again. So the first law of thermodynamics, this is one of those laws, that's this law, tells us that matter can be changed but cannot be created or destroyed. That seems to be a very solid and sound piece of information, and I've studied it in school, and you probably have too. The second law of thermodynamics, heat dynamics is really what thermodynamics is about, tells us that all mass or energy organized into an effect continually proceeds to a lower level of usefulness. I have read that the sun, that we're a part of, that our planet rotates around, is actually decreasing over time. Now, what that is, I understand it's a big ball of hydrogen burning, if you would, and that process comes about there's helium is part of the product, and light radiation is another part of that product. But it's running down. The sun is running down. Now this energy, the heat comes down here, it comes by us, and it helps us to live, but it's running down too. You look at yourself in the mirror, what do you say about you? Running down, yes, already heavy on the running. Well, it's more of a crawl now for me, but anyhow, I'm crawling down, if that can be a way to look at that. But that's a fundamental premise of physics. Everything that they've looked at is running down. The universe is running down. I read a couple of days ago that the moon is actually moving farther, a little bit farther away from the earth over time. I mean, it's incremental. For us, we'd never know the difference, but in time, they've measured it. In time, that'll probably be there if this lasts long enough. So our sun's kind of declining in its ability to produce light and heat. The moon is going to move away from us. The moon is really important because it controls the axis of the earth. It controls the tides that bring the water in and out. And it causes the water to be moving out in the oceans, and that movement around causes the water to do some evaporation. That evaporation goes up into the clouds, and it comes down as heat. It turns into rain, and it comes down. And what a rain cycle we know about that. The moon causes that. Of course, you got to have the water and stuff for it to happen, but it's incredible. So anyhow, for any cause, every cause must be at least as great as the effect that it produces, and will actually produce an effect that is less than the cause. That is, any effect must have a greater cause. That's what I've been trying to talk about. Another one I would like to look at is that you push it once and it's supposed to change and it doesn't change, you push it again and so it changes. What did I do? You know, I'm still learning, okay. Laws require a lawgiver. When you get out of bed in the morning, which way do you expect your feet to go? Well, I mean, they could go up and you'd be on your back and hit your head on the floor, but that's not what I'm really trying to say. I'm trying to say that when you get out of bed, your feet always go down. Your feet will always go down to the floor because of the law of gravity. Where did that law come from? Or you get in your car and you're driving 70 miles an hour down the road and you lose control and you run into a big truck coming right head on. What happens? What does momentum do for you? See, that's the law of momentum. You've got so much mass, you're going so fast. The truck has got a lot of mass, he's going so fast. You put it together, boys, it creates a lot of energy, and that energy just destroys the vehicles. It probably destroy your life too. But what I'm trying to say is that law of momentum is always there. If you're driving your car, you ought to be careful. We know that. We've learned that for a long time back. If you're driving your car, you need to be consciously driving it so that you know what you're doing. You cannot be intoxicated or on drugs. You really don't want to do that. If they catch you doing that, then, which is right, if they catch you doing that, you may be a lot of consequences to pay, other than you may kill yourself and somebody else. If you're driving like that and you kill yourself, I say, well, that's your fault, but you may cause some real heartache to some other family. So you have to be really careful about that. But that law of momentum is a law. It is always there. You drive fast, you're driving really fast, and you decide to you lose control of your car and you hit a tree over there, what's going to happen? Momentum will just beat that car to pieces and probably kill you. That big old tree may just stand there and say, I told you so, boy. Momentum always works. It's a law. Law's given to us. So laws require a lawgiver. Who put gravity in effect to start with? Who put momentum in effect to start with? Where did that come from? Did it just evolve? No, it didn't evolve. It's part of the system that God put together here, and that's part of the laws that we live by. Laws require a lawgiver. It's illogical to ascribe time and chance and causative factors to producing laws. There's only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. James 4:12 tells us that. There is one lawgiver. Who is it? Well, it's God. You see, so you and I would understand that pretty well. One more thing I might talk about is the existence of morals. Mankind, unlike the animals, has a moral code, and where did it come from? It is impossible for matter by itself to evolve a system of moral right and wrong. Yet man recognizes right and wrong. I would suppose, I've been to some parts of the world and look around, everybody has a system of right and wrong. They may be different somewhat. I don't think any place is, unless you was in Germany when Hitler was there, murder's never right. Rape is never right. Lying is never right. Stealing is never right. Oh, some people do that, but it's not right. Where did that idea of right and wrong morally come from? I don't think monkeys have that idea. I don't believe they even generate anything like that at all. Man didn't evolve to have that. Man was created with right moral values. And so we try to look at it, and so I think moral values really helps a lot too. It's another point. You might look at some of these and say, well, I'm not sure that all those are true, but you can look at whichever ones you want to, but I'd say the predominant evidence says these are probably all true is the way I look at it. The only option that makes sense is that humans have adopted God's standard of right and wrong. Now, the Oklahoma law may say you got to file your taxes, and you got to drive 35 miles an hour here, and you got to do this, you got to do that. But the values of right and wrong, I believe, are really given to us from God to start with. And what mankind is pretty much perceived on that. There are a few individuals that don't care. They choose to do what they want to do, and if I get, I need some drugs, well, I'll go out and if I just rob somebody, okay, no problem, no problem. Some kids come along today that get out of high school and no worky, so we'll say, well, I'll just deceit some people and I'll just beat them out of some money. I don't want to have to go to work. My goodness, that's incredible. That's what slaves do. I'm going to do my own thing and I'm going to try to, some way or another, get me some money that I can live and do what I want to do. But we all have a moral value that says working is good. Working to take care of ourselves is a good thing. So God's unchanging nature allows our morals to be recognized as absolute standards. We're similar to God in some ways. God is love, and we're people of love, which should be anyhow. But we're different, of course, in a huge way. Existence of goodness, love, all mean the same both to us and to God. We have them, but we have them in a limited way, and God has them in an unlimited way. So I think we'll stop there. So we've looked at those 6 things that I think talk about quite a bit of information about, help us to understand about the concept that there is a creator, a supreme being, if you would, that created all this, and it all points the best we can look at it as God. Now, next week, I hope to look at, well, what do we understand specifically about that God? We looked at some of the evidence today that seems to say, we look at it and we say, yep, there is a creator. There is a designer. There is a code programmer. There is one who has a cause and effect for us. There's one who has moral values for us. I cannot throw those out the window and say, I don't believe those are true. I have to accept them because that's the evidence points that way to me. And I will not discard those as true and valuable evidence. And so the evidence is what I'm looking for, because I really want to try to understand this book that we call the Bible. Can I really have confidence in that in addition to what it says? And we look at what it says, the internal evidence, and boy, that's incredible. But what about the external evidence? Oh, that can be pretty incredible too when you look. Okay, glad you're here. Thank you.